show starts right now.
Airwaves of ESPN Radio and ESPN News, 250 plus markets across the United States of America, plus ESPN Radio on Sirius XM Channel 80, plus ESPN Radio. Simulcast over the live national television airways of ESPN News. Number to call up as always is 888-SAY-ESPN. That's 888-729-3777. A reminder that Golick and Wingo will be live from Maryland this Friday covering the Cowboys-Redskins matchup, part of ESPN Radio's Fall Football Tour, brought to you by Marathon. Get 5 cents off every gallon every day with Make It Count rewards from Marathon. To sign up, visit makeitcount.com or download the free app. On the line with us right now, my honor and privilege to have my next guest. Some will call him the mouth of the South. Obviously, a foremost authority in the world of college football. I say a foremost authority in the world of football, period. Has his own radio show as well. You can hear him right here, the great one himself, the one and only Paul Finebaum. How are you, buddy? How's everything?
Stephen A., I'm great. It's great to be on with you again.
Thank you, man. Listen, I want to start off the show today with you, the interview with you, on a high note for me. I must confess. I have to confess. It's a high note for me, Paul Finebaum, and that's Chip Kelly at UCLA. I don't mean to laugh too flagrantly about it, but I mean an 0-2 start, blaming his team for practices or whatever. You know college football. What the hell is going on with Chip Kelly at UCLA? It seems like he might not last the season, for crying out loud.
No, I mean, I still want to believe that he knows what he's doing. I said that to a friend of ours today, and she quickly corrected me with his record going back to his last year at the Eagles, the 49ers, and this. And Stephen A., you know it's something like 9-29. It's abysmal.
His team for practices or whatever. You know college football. What the hell is going on with Chip Kelly at UCLA? It seems like he might not last the season. And then running their mouth prior to the game. Obviously, Clemson shut that down. Won the victory 24-10. It wasn't as awful as I thought it potentially would be. Jimbo Fisher appears to have them in the right direction. But I first wanted to know, what did you think about the game? And secondly, what do you think about the job that Jimbo Fisher's doing at Texas A&M right now?
Yeah, I thought Clemson played really well. And by the way, for those who didn't see the game, A&M scored with about 3 seconds to go just to make it semi-respectable. It was never going to be what we saw last year. That was ridiculous to think that A&M could hang with them in Clemson. Clemson's exactly who we thought they were. A lot of us were concerned maybe with all those guys going to the NFL, especially on the defensive line, they would take a slight step backwards. No. But the one thing about Clemson I will point out before I get to Jimbo, we're just not going to know for a very long time. Stephen, I thought this week, last week and this week when they go to Syracuse, were going to be the defining moments of the season. But after what happened to Syracuse, thank goodness you didn't speak to this team this year. I mean, they look terrible at Maryland. And, yeah, I think this game might be interesting for a while. It's going to be a big scene. Clemson's probably a little hungover, but this will not be much of a test. And they don't really have anyone left. I mean, they're on easy street until they get to the playoffs. As far as A&M, I was really disappointed in Kellen Mond, the quarterback. He struggled for a guy that's been around a long time. But I think A&M will have a respectable season. Now, with their schedule, they have the top 3 teams in the country on the schedule. So those are 3 losses. They've already lost one of those, Alabama and Georgia later. they're going to have to fight hard to go 8-4. And even then, it may not be that simple. So I think a lot of progress is being made, but it probably won't show up until next year in the final record.
Well, if it doesn't show up till next year, obviously, if I recall correctly, Jimbo Fisher got signed to about a 10-year, $75 million deal,
Correct.
if I remember correctly. Obviously, we look at it from that perspective, and there were some expectations. And I've actually been at the Texas A&M facilities. I did the show from there on one occasion. It's an absolutely fabulous campus, absolutely fabulous facility. I look at it from that perspective, and I say there's no excuse to be second or third fiddle on a consistent basis to even the Alabamas or the Georgias when you've got a Jimbo Fisher as your coach. You should be right there competing with them. Am I being a bit premature with that? Am I unfair with it? What's the deal?
No, you're not. And right now, you could argue they're no better than the fourth best team in the SEC West. When you pay that kind of bread, right, Stephen A., you better be in the top 3 or 4 in the country. Forget a division in a great conference. So he's got pressure. He's recruiting well. I think I'm not a patient guy when it comes to coaches who are making nearly $10 million a year. But I think if he can survive this season with a reasonable record, 8 maybe 9 wins with a postseason. Next year is going to be critical because you can't be alibiing 3 years into it. Kevin Sumlin got run after 5.
Getting back to what you alluded to about Clemson, what can we do, or is there anything that could or should be done about a reigning defending national champion having this kind of schedule? When we're week 2, they're 2 games into the season, for crying out loud, and you're telling me it's a cakewalk to the postseason. I'm looking at it from that perspective, and I'm like, my goodness, from a scheduling standpoint, shouldn't there be better games when you're talking about some of the elite programs in the nation?
Well, let me defend them on one regard, Stephen. They're playing two big-time SEC schools in A&M and South Carolina. You can laugh about where they are in the SEC, okay, but we're not talking about the Citadel here. We're talking about A&M, which was a top 12, top 13 team in South Carolina, which is really nowhere right now. But the issue is the ACC. It's become a very inferior league. And they're also fortunate. Notre Dame plays 5 ACC games. They're not part of that rotation, although it wouldn't have made any difference. We saw that in the playoff last year. Florida State is a dumpster fire. That used to be their toughest game of the year. Miami is 0 for the season right now. Virginia looks pretty good. Virginia Tech looks pretty bad. So there's nowhere to go, they'll probably play Virginia in the ACC title game. That's nothing. Stephen A., I agree with you, but there's almost nothing that can be done right now because, in fairness to Dabo Swinney, he's playing legitimate teams non-conference.
The great Paul Finebaum right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. Before I get back into some of these other teams, I wanted to stop at Oregon just for a second. I saw them drop 77 on Nevada. Obviously, Justin Herbert, a lot is being made about him and his potential of being a top quarterback taken in the upcoming draft, or at least second to Tua. What are your thoughts about him, what you've seen from him, and what you need to see from him as the season progresses?
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen more from him against Auburn versus Nevada. But I really felt like Mario Cristobal, the coach, blew that game. They had the game in hand. He just could not pull the trigger on finishing Auburn off, and I realized that was last week's story, but that will haunt them for a very long time. I think Oregon is clearly the best team in the Pac-12. Stanford has just really fallen apart, as you saw last week against SC. SC, I think, is good. Maybe not great, but they're good. And I think right now Oregon is in trouble in terms of getting into the playoff, even if they run the table. And Herbert, I've gone back and forth. I think I was with you a week or two ago, and I thought maybe he would go ahead of Tua. I'm backing off that right now, even though we haven't seen a lot of Tua. But he is certainly in contention right now. Of course, if he looks at the NFL and thinks maybe I should just have a bad senior season so I don't have to go to Miami.
Michigan, overtime to beat Army. Overtime to beat Army. I know they're 2-0, but I'm worried about Jim Harbaugh right now because clearly I don't see an appearance in the college football playoff. And I anticipate, based on what I'm seeing from what Ryan Day is doing in Ohio State, seemingly picking up right where Urban Meyer left off, I don't see Michigan beating Ohio State either. If both of those things come to fruition, it doesn't look good for Jim Harbaugh in my estimation. What about you?
No, listen, I've somewhat defended Harbaugh this year. I felt like he was going to get it done, but right now, 2 weeks into it, it doesn't look like he is. He's got a game, I think it's at Wisconsin in a couple of weeks. That is going to be the real test, Stephen A. If he can't get out of there, then the critics are going to rain down on him, because after that, there's Notre Dame and obviously the end of the season game against Ohio State. My issue with him is his offensive philosophy. He brought in Josh Gaddis from Alabama. Nothing's different. It's the same Jim Harbaugh, 3 yards in a cloud of dust offense. It's unimaginative. And, Army is a good program. You know what I'm about to say. They took Oklahoma to overtime last year. It's hard to get up for them. It's hard to game plan against them. But that was still an embarrassment. They were just lucky to win the game. But I think some of those Michigan fans that you and I have been talking to for 2 or 3 years are starting to listen. They're getting frustrated. Could that dam break? Yes, you better believe it could.
Who's the sleeper for you in college football? Somebody that we should be paying attention to that is really flying under the radar?
Well, there was LSU, but they're no longer a sleeper. Stephen, it's hard to get beyond 5 or 6 or 7 teams and really come up with someone, because I think if you look at it realistically, move Clemson off the table and then take 2 of the next 3. What I mean by that is Georgia, Alabama, or LSU. I think 2 of those 3 will get in there. So what are you vying for now? You're vying essentially for one spot. Is it the Big Ten? Probably. Could Oklahoma be that school? Possibly. Beyond that, I don't really see anyone that's in that is next level. I think you have 6 or 7 teams in college football, and there is a precipitous drop-off. Now, Penn State is interesting. I might, buy a coin or 2 on them just to break through. But beyond that, I'm struggling to find a sleeper. I don't think it's Auburn because the schedule is just too brutal.
Let's go back to Oklahoma, because you mentioned them. Jalen Hurts has looked pretty damn good for them thus far. Have you been surprised by that at all?
I haven't, because I've known him, as you have, for a number of years, and he was really good 2 years ago, and we just forgot about him because he held the clipboard last year for Tua. But, he is a better passer. He's still not great. I'm still not sure he's going to knock people over in the NFL, although I might take a shot at him based on some of the garbage I see in the NFL on Sunday. But I think he's got a good complement around him. He's got the best offensive mind in the game as his head coach. And I listen, picking a Heisman on September 10th is hazardous, but I'll be very surprised. I'll be shocked if he's not a finalist for the Heisman in December.
I don't want to come across as sacrilegious, but I know that people say this about Lincoln Riley, people like you and I and what have you, because this is what we hear. Right. He's the best offensive mind in college football. But do folks in college football really feel that way about him? Do they feel that way about Lincoln Riley?
Yeah, I think, listen, people in the industry are always somewhat blind to what's going on in front of them. But I have to think they would be coming around to him. I mean, he had a big reputation as a coordinator, and I think the people at Oklahoma knew he was about to bolt. That's why Bob Stoops decided, you know what, I'm out of here. Let's turn the keys over to him. But I'm not sure he gets the credit that we give him. I think that's really a good point, a very salient point, Stephen A.
Well, for me personally, the reason I asked that question is because he did have Baker Mayfield one year.
Yeah.
Then he did have Kyler Murray the other. These are not exactly scrubs. As a matter of fact, they're both Heisman Trophy winners. Now, obviously, you got to give him credit where credit is due, because he's the brains behind it all, and he has a lot to do with their development, not taking anything away from him. But those were some extraordinary talents at the quarterback position.
Well,
so I'm looking at that as being an assist to the coach.
The one thing I will say there, and that's a fair point, but the one commonality between Baker, Kyler, and obviously Jalen Hurts is they were cast aside by someone else, and they went to Oklahoma, and he played a big role in developing those two, and obviously now with Jalen Hurts. So I think that's really where he gets the most credit as someone who not only is a offensive-minded genius, I think, but someone who has been able to develop. Because just because you're a good offensive coach doesn't mean you develop quarterbacks. I think we gave Gus Malzahn at Auburn a lot of credit because he had Cam Newton. Well, guess what? He hasn't done a whole lot at the quarterback position since Cam Newton.
Paul Finebaum right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. Before I get into the SEC, I want to ask you, the college football players, we've talked about this on and off on several occasions, and obviously that 4-game playoff situation in college football, a lot of people looked at it, liked it, others wish there were more teams or whatever. Where do you stand at this particular moment in time, having seen what you have seen the last 4 years? There's always a 5th or 6th team that's been on the outside looking in that we kind of figured or wished would have been thrown into the mix. Are you of that mindset that it's fine where it is, or does it need to be increased to 6 or an 8-team playoff situation?
I could go with either 6 or 8. I do not like where it is. And Stephen A., I've spent most of my life in college football, and I'm deeply concerned about the sport of college football because I think you have a number of people who are making the key decisions who just simply aren't listening to fans. You and I, we talk to fans every day, and this sport is under pressure for a couple of reasons. Number one, the NFL has always been huge. But 3 or 4 years ago, college football was right behind the NFL. Now the NBA has become the superstar. And college football doesn't have an answer to that other than to say everything is fine. Well, everything is not fine. The playoffs have been relatively boring for the most part. The national semifinals, which should be tantamount to the college basketball Final Four, was a bust last year. You had a 27-point game with Notre Dame losing to Clemson. You had Alabama up by 4 touchdowns to Oklahoma. The game was closer at the end, but no one really thought they were going to lose. So, okay, you say by adding 2 or 4 more, is that going to change the dynamics? It may not change the final game, Clemson and Alabama every year, but it brings more people to the party, and that's what the sport needs. The NFL is great because you may be 8-8, but you got a shot at the wild card. In college football, if you're not at the elitist level, forget about it.
Paul Finebaum right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. The SEC, I watched LSU beat Texas. What did you peel from that game?
That's what we've been hearing from Baton Rouge, that this was a different operation, and it is. Joe Brady came over from the Saints. Now, okay, the Saints looked okay without Joe Brady last night. I think you would agree with me. But he brought some life to an offensive philosophy at LSU that was very stagnant, very predictable, and it's not predictable anymore. And in Joe Burrow, who was a transfer from Ohio State, they now have someone who can operate the system, and he operated it brilliantly Saturday night. They're a legitimate team. They've got a couple of tricky games that you may not be thinking about. I mean, you look at Florida at home, but the following week they go to Mississippi State, a place they've lost the last couple of times there. We know about the Alabama game in early November, but you could argue if they only lose at Alabama, they may still have a shot. Now, by the way, they're not conceding anything. Right now we haven't seen enough of Alabama to know what they have, but I think they can stay on the same field with Alabama.
So are we just assuming that Alabama and Georgia are the teams to beat in the SEC because they are who they are, or do they legitimately look considerably better than LSU or anybody else? They
don't look considerably better right now, but the sample size with Alabama is terrible. We're talking about Duke and New Mexico State. I mean, those are just they would qualify for a Bum of the Month club if you're looking at a Friday night boxing match. I mean, as far as Georgia's played a little bit better opposition, but not much. But that's all going to change. And I hate to spend 6 months getting ready for the season, and now that we're in the season, say, hey, we got to wait for a game in a week or two. But Georgia plays Notre Dame next week, a week from Saturday. That will take care of some of that conversation. I don't know when Alabama's playing a decent game, Stephen A. This week they were supposed to have one on the road at South Carolina, but South Carolina has looked terrible. And in the first game against North Carolina, they're a 25-point favorite. We won't really. And then the next game for Alabama is at Texas A&M. I don't think we're going to know about Alabama until November.
Who's the best quarterback in college football right now, in your estimation?
Woo, that's an interesting question, but I'm tempted to go.
Let me switch it this way.
Okay.
If you were an NFL team and you had the first overall pick,
okay,
and any quarterback playing in college football right now was available for your draft, who would you take?
I would still go Trevor Lawrence, although I am going to tell you that what I've seen in 2 weeks of Justin Fields would have me looking very closely at him. Stephen A., he is so athletic. I was talking to Mike Tannenbaum earlier today, and he said he was at an Ohio State practice, and he said this guy just looks the part. I mean, physical. He says he's one of the fastest quarterbacks he's seen. So I need to see a little bit more because we saw nothing from him last year at Georgia. I'd still go with Trevor Lawrence. So I think he's a generational quarterback.
Paul Finebaum, the great one. Always appreciate you, buddy. Looking forward to talking to you soon. You take
Can't
it
wait.
easy.
Thank you, Stephen A.
No problem. One and only Paul Finebaum, the mouth of the South, an expert on all things football as far as I'm concerned. The man knows the NFL and college football, by the way. And I love watching him on TV, too, and listening to him on the Paul Finebaum radio show. Make sure you do the same. 888-SAY-ESPN. It's 888-729-3776. You're listening live to Stephen A. ESPN Radio, ESPN News. Back with your calls and more in a minute. By the way, when it comes to hiring, you don't have time to waste. You need to get to your short list of qualified candidates fast. That's why you need Indeed.com. Post a job in minutes, set up screening questions based on your job requirements, then zero in on qualified candidates using an intuitive online dashboard. Discover why more than 3 million businesses use Indeed for hiring. Post a job today at Indeed.com/hire. That's Indeed.com/hire.